and we were to set up a casualty staging unit for the Air Force. We wore a white uniform, and we set this building up, and the first plane that came was supposed to be from Korea, so we didn't expect anything. The head nurse sent me down to the airport to get this busload of patients, which turned out to be 35 amputees, young boys. Even though I had a lot of experience, I had not this kind of experience. How do you react to that? My name is Deanna Halterman Savage, and I was a nurse for I don't know how many years, a long time, and I graduated from nursing school in 1958. And
give me a little of your family. Where did you grow up?
Stanton, Virginia, and Tampa, Florida. And then I went to school at Johns Hopkins when I graduated from high school.
That was nursing school?
That was my nursing school.
And you said your family was military.
My father was, he was a Marine, and then he was in the Army, and then he was in the Air Force.
So he
died in the Air Force.
Right, he did Nicaragua as a Marine.
And Peking.
And then World War
II, he was Army, and he went to North Africa and southern Italy. And then he came home, and he was a recruiter, and he was a good old boy from West Virginia, so he was a good recruiter. A lot of mothers didn't like him, but and then we lived in the small town of Stanton, Virginia, and there were only two military people there, my father and the sergeant that was over SMA, the Stanton Military Academy. It was a college town, Mary Baldwin. And
you said your father never talked about his service.
Mm-mm. And then he died when he was 53 at Walter Reed. So I think there were two things that made me think about nursing. One was his death, and I was 14.
When he was how old?
53. And I remember the corpsman moving his feet, rubbing his feet as he was dying, and I thought that was so fantastic. They just sat there and did his feet. And my brother at that point was in the Army, and he came home, and we, it was kind of lonely. My mother, when my brother left, had to go back to Fort Bragg. My mother and I were alone, but of course my father was SAC. I can't even pronounce it, Strategic Air Command. And he went 3 months to places like Goose Bay, Labrador. And then he would come home for 3 months, and then he would go somewhere else for 3 months. And so we were kind of used to not having him around. But when he died, my mother was only 45, and she was lonely, and so she kept me out of school, and we'd go shopping. And after a while, I finally said to her, Mom, I really have to go to school. And so she got the message that, she'd have to do something. And I saw one day a man that was my father's best friend, and I told him that he ought to come and see my mother. He was single. And that, my dad wasn't there anymore, and he hadn't been around anymore. So he came, and they got married. And
you set your mom up. Wow.
Yeah.
You don't hear that very often.
Well, she was wanting me to be with her all the time, and I couldn't go to the teenage club. I couldn't do anything. So this was a good thing. And by the time I graduated, I really didn't know what I wanted to do. And in those days, women who didn't have a lot of money, which we didn't have, either were nurses or teachers. And I didn't want to be a teacher. I wasn't interested in teaching, and so I wanted to be a nurse. And I didn't realize, that I really turned out to be a really good nurse. When I got to I got accepted by Johns Hopkins.
And that's probably a big deal.
Well, it was, I thought.
That's a big place.
But as time passed, I realized Johns Hopkins tried to get a nurse from every state. They wanted to teach nursing and then send the nurse back to her state to teach nursing, because nurses need to teach the patient how to take care of himself, and so that's what we were. We were not only a nurse, but we were teachers, and I loved it. I just
So how did you actually end up in Vietnam?
Well, I joined in 1960, and I went.
What made you join?
A colonel that was on this same little base with my father
in England.
In England, had a teenage daughter that wanted to go to Rome, and so I was her escort, watched out for her. And when we came home, he said, "You're a nurse, aren't you?" And I said, "Yes, and I'm licensed here in England. I'm going to try and get a job." Well, he said, "You ought to join the Air Force Nurse Corps." And, it hit me, but it didn't say anything. But when I went to get this job in the English hospital, the hours were split shift. And I was 20, I turned 21 there, and I'm like, a split shift? And I had the same amount of patients that we had in the States, but I had 2 pot-bellied stoves I had to keep going.
Oh, wow.
And I had to do the housekeeping. We had housekeeping
in the States. Mm-hmm.
And the housekeeping is on a 35-bed ward is a lot of housekeeping.
Yeah.
And it was like, no, thank you, because I was young. I wanted to date. I wanted to, So I thought, well, I'll just go back home. After it was probably almost a year, I went back home. And I went home on the USS America, the last ship, ocean liner. It was its last trip back to the States. And it was a lot of fun. It was the bottom floor was all Hungarian refugees.
Coming to America.
Wow. And I was second class, but we could go. We had a lot of fun on the second class, but the weather was so rough that we had to be tied into our seats to eat. We had to dance from one couch to the other couch. I mean, it was...
Was that mostly the whole trip?
The whole trip.
Oh, gosh.
It was March. And the North Sea of the North Atlantic is rough. But, it was fun. It was just an exciting time. And when I went home, I decided one of my classmates was in Chicago and told me to come to Chicago. So I went to Chicago, and en route from England to Chicago was like 2 weeks. And she got married and moved, so she wasn't there. But I went to work for Chicago Wesley Memorial Hospital, and I did that for a while and got bored. I didn't know anybody, and I had seen all the museums and everything. So I decided one morning when I got off work, I went to the recruiter's office and signed up to join the Air Force Nurse Corps, and I got my orders to New York, APO, New York. So I thought I was going to New York, and she said, "No, I think this is overseas." And then I remembered, yes, it's an APO. That's what we had in England. And so I said, well, find out where it is, where this APO goes to. And it turned out to be England.
So was that considered basic training, or is there something like that? Where was basic training at?
Maxwell, and it was doctors and nurses, and we marched. And the nurses marched perfectly, and the doctors did not.
Outside?
Outside, yes, we marched. We learned a lot of things about war, what we would have to do if there was a war, and they told us a lot of stuff about secret stuff about medicines that we might have to use and all this stuff, And it was, I think, 6 weeks.
Was it kind of the typical thing? Were they abusing, like yelling at you guys, or no?
No. We were never yelled at. We had doctors in the midst.
But the doctors didn't have to do the marching stuff.
Oh, but they did, but they didn't do it well. We made fun of them because they didn't know their left foot from their right foot, for one thing, and it was kind of fun.
What was your takeaway from that basic training stuff?
Not much. I'm a nurse in the Air Force, and I didn't learn anything about the Air Force. And I was a second lieutenant, and I was just having there was a set of twins in my class, and they had a car. They had a brand new, I think it was a Ford, and the top went into the back. It was a hard top, went into the back, brand new car, and we went to Pensacola while we were in training, and we just had a good time. And then
and that was no war was going on then, right? That's
it was the Cold War.
The Cold War,
yeah. So finally, in October, I went in September. So sometime in October, my plane to England was there. And I don't remember much about that, but I got to my base, and it was a Second World War. It's wooden. It's all wooden. And the hospital was the base commander was a doctor. It was just a hospital, and it had a long corridor, and all the wards came off of that long corridor. And it was the second largest hospital in Europe. So Wiesbaden had the biggest. The only thing we couldn't do was neurosurgery. We could do everything else. And
was it full of patients? Or was
yeah,
it was. What kind of things?
Patients came from all over England, all over the UK, like I can't remember the name of it. In Scotland, where the Navy had submarines and things, we got several of their patients. We got women had their babies there. We had psychiatry. And just one thing that happened, and I happened to be a second lieutenant. I was the lowest ranking nurse there, so I was what they called a PRN nurse. They sent me wherever they needed somebody. And this particular day, I was in the psychiatric unit, and they were having a group thing with the patients all sitting around, and the doctor and nurse there, and we're sitting there, and this new patient, the doctor asked him, what brought him to the psychiatric unit, and he said, "Well, I sit in a little a little house with 2 beds and 2 phones, and one phone rings and I answer it, and then I run out to my airplane and I get in my airplane and start it up, and then another phone rings and tells me to go back to my apartment. I never get off the ground. I just do that for 3 months. And then I go home to the States, and then I come back, and I'm 3 months at the States, just like my father. And then I'm 3 months, and I sit in this little place, and I pulled the phone out of the wall, and they didn't think that was right. So they sent me here. And the psychiatrist said, "Well, it sounds normal to me, but we'll give you a 6-week rest." Did you ever see MASH?
Mm-hmm.
Well, this hospital was my version of MASH. When it snowed, which it did, we would take those metal bedpans and slide down the hill. We had dances in our officers' club, and it was just a fun place, you know. It wasn't a war. We would do plane crash exercises in the middle of the night, and that was always fun, except challenging.
Just to see how you deal with an emergency.
Yeah. And they would have, they called them mellages. They would be injured, you know, so we would treat the injury, whatever it was. And then eventually I told my director of nursing that I was tired of doing wherever because I had no say in what was going on the ward, and there were some things I didn't approve of and I couldn't change. And she didn't really understand that. So I was on her blacklist, so to speak, after that. But I got sent to the ICU recovery room combination thing, and I had a fantastic charge nurse. She'd been in Korea, and she was I just loved her. Unfortunately, she was overweight and was put out of the service. And I was really angry because another nurse was taken off her ward drunk. And she was sent to Wiesbaden for 1 week for the cure, which obviously was not going to do anything. And she made colonel.
Wow.
And my major, who was a fantastic nurse because she was a little bit overweight, was put out. And I was really upset by that. That was one of the traumatic experiences. I mean, it didn't seem like it mattered that she was such a good nurse,
right.
You know.
Right.
And, but I had some good examples there. And the neurologist was one of the better examples of. The surgeon was a little tiny guy, but he was fantastic. And then we got another surgeon that was fantastic. But we had some that were, you know,
not so good.
Not so good. But we had.
How long were you there?
From October 1960 to March 1964. And I got sent to Hamilton Air Force Base. And you could actually...
Where's that? What state's that in?
It's close to Corte Madera in California. And I picked it because you could, if you knew what if it was fighter pilots or SAC, or that was called TAC, if you put that in I learned to ski while I was in England. Oh. I went to Switzerland, and they had this marvelous package deal, food lessons for like $100 for a week, you know. So I went every year for 3 years, and I learned to ski. You know, the last time I went, we skied from the top of this mountain. It took us all day. The lunchtime was in the middle of the mountain, and it was just marvelous. You went up on a train, and so I wanted to be somewhere that I could ski, and California was the only one I knew of. And so I arranged TAC, and it turned out to be Hamilton Air Force Base, a nice little Air Force base. It had a small hospital, but by this time I was a captain, and so I worked in the OR for a little while, and that's not my thing because you're more a director, and so I got to be a nurse. I had a clinic. I had a pediatric clinic, and I enjoyed that, and an outpatient clinic, and I enjoyed that. And I was also the immunization and allergy clinic. So
you had a lot of autonomy there.
Yeah, and I was it, you know, and I liked it. I liked being in charge, and on my weekends or whenever I was off, I was up in the mountains at Heavenly Valley skiing, you know, and While some of the doctors were looking at the stocks, I was looking at the weather. And we were a small hospital, and so we were all friends and, all partied together and did everything together.
Was the Vietnam War picking up at that point?
Starting. And it ended up, the base in England was closed after I left. At this base, well, my friend that I had been in with for the whole time called me up. She was in Sacramento, and we were in England together. And she called me up and said, I got orders. And I said, well, how come you got them before I got them? I got transferred before you got transferred. And she said, I don't know. And I said, well, where are you going? Travis, which was down the road from Sacramento where well, I said, oh, wow, that's a big move. And the next day I got the same orders. And we were, so I left Hamilton, and I had a broken hand from skiing. And we were to set up a casualty staging unit for the Air Force. And so we wore a white uniform, and we set this building up. And the first plane that came was supposed to be from Korea, according to the information we got. So we didn't expect anything. And because we were still kind of setting up, the head nurse, who was a major, sent me down to the airport to get this busload of patients, which turned out to be 35 amputees, young boys. And even though I had a lot of experience, I had not this kind of experience. And they were all saying to me, oh, nurse, what happened to your hand? Because it was in a cast. And what was I supposed to say? I was having a good time skiing down the mountain. How'd you lose your leg and arm? And it was a very stressful time for me. And you can't cry. You can't show any emotion. You have to treat them like they're human beings and that they're good people. And it was hard. It was the hardest thing I ever had to do because it was the spur of the moment. I was expecting heart attacks or something like that. And so were we at the casualty staging unit. And so we put them on the bus.
How old would you say most of these guys were?
18, 19.
So really
These were young kids.
That must have been so startling.
It was awful.
And you had no lead up to that?
No. And at that point in my career, I had a lot of experience, but I'd only seen 2 amputees, and they were old diabetics. And these were young kids. And they were worried about me. And I'm like, how do you react to that? I did the best I could, and I got them on the plane and got to the hospital and the casualty staging unit. And our job was to assess them, make sure that they didn't need anything, their dressings changed and whatnot, and feed them, and then give them a hot, nice bed to go to bed in, clean them up, and then in the morning we would ship them out to whatever hospital was close to their home. So it was just overnight stays. Well, half of them needed to go to the hospital. When you fly, you have to have a certain amount of blood on board. You have to be able to breathe. There's a lot of rules. And I had flight training somewhere along there. I don't know where it was, but somewhere I went for 6 weeks to flight school. And a lot of these kids didn't have that. And so we couldn't ship them out. We had to ship them to the hospital and get them. And then the burns, the helicopter pilots got burned badly. They also got their bottoms shot off. They shoot up, and so they finally put steel plates in the helicopters, but the burns still kept coming. And unfortunately, when you get to altitude, these are flying into, from Vietnam to Travis. Everything dries out. When you fly, you're you have to drink, and these burns put out all of this fluid, and it would dry on the sheets. And we'd have to take them over to the whirlpool and put them in a whirlpool to get their sheets off.
That must have been so painful for them.
Oh, yeah. And finally, they came up with a butter, a silver butter that was sofa butter. And we just...
Cake it on.
Just cake it on. Just put it all over them. Nothing stuck to them. And they got no infections. That stopped them getting infections. And
were they on morphine?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Gosh, that must have been such a shock from everything, your other previous experience.
Yeah. I mean, I had a lot of nursing experience, but not this kind of nursing experience. And so those poor Vietnam nurses, the Army nurses that went straight from nursing school that was a mistake. Whoever did that was a mistake. The Air Force would have never done that. But, we learned a lot while we were in this casualty staging unit. So when I got orders to fly, it was about a year later.
How many more planefuls did you get before then? How often were the planes coming in?
They came in every night. Every day we had a new lot to send out. And it was an experience that not as bad as Vietnam, but because they'd had some work done, but I got to the point where I could tolerate without emotion up to 3 amputations and a head wound. I never got used to that. But the rest of them, you just had to treat them. I mean, I felt like these are 18, 19-year-old boys, and when I was flying, I'm bringing them back to a country that has no appreciation for them, signs up, go home yank in Japan, and then we get to the States, and we can't wear our uniform off base. What kind of a country is this, These kids were drafted. They didn't say that they liked the war, but they were in it. And now we need to take care of them. And it just was really hard. I told my I had an outstanding corpsman, a Sergeant Harris, and we flew together always. It was 2 nurses and 2 corpsmen. And all these litter stretchers, and ambulatory. Usually it was like 35 stretchers and 20 ambulatory, and 2 nurses and 2 corpsmen. And we had a foot locker of bandages and IVs and a medicine kit with emergency drugs and morphine and narcotics. And that had to stay with me at all times. Except on the plane, it was sitting by my chair. But the rest of the time, that had to be with me.
Back me up just a little bit. How did you end up on the plane? So you're saying you ended up on the plane that was bringing these guys over the first time?
Yeah.
How did that happen? I
spent a year in that casualty staging unit.
And how many boys did you think you saw in there? Thousands?
Yeah. I don't know. In a year, it was a lot. Not all of them were really bad, but almost most of them had amputations. I mean, that was common. They,
geez, that must have been startling to just go back to your regular to see that in mass.
Well, when I started flying, I was stationed. I did a year at this casualty staging unit, and then I got transferred to Clark Air Force Base in the Philippines, headquartered out of...
After a year of this thing?
After a year at the casualty staging, out of Hawaii, the headquarters of the 57th Aeroevac Squadron. And I was part of that squadron, but I was stationed in the Philippines. It was my home station. We did 2 weeks of ditching an airplane and getting the patients off pretend.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Just practicing.
Practicing.
You had guys pretending to be patients?
I
Or
don't
what?
think we did. I think it
you were
was
just practicing
yeah,
that.
just getting all the equipment down, and it was kind of fun, you know.
Yeah.
I guess, well, I was excited about flying.
Yeah.
And the airplane, I have some pictures of it, but the bus literally could back into this plane. It was that big.
Mm-hmm.
And it was, when we flew from our base with cargo to Vietnam, and 2 corpsmen, 2 nurses. And I took half the plane and she took the other half. And we would unload all the cargo while the corpsman helped the loadmaster unload the cargo and put up stanchions to hold the stretchers. And we had
And they were on either side of the plane? Were they on the sides of the plane?
2 rows down the middle, and with 4 and 3 on the sides. And while they were doing that, the 2 nurses would go to the MASH unit and get the report from the nurses. As you know, the poor MASH nurses, they, you know, and they don't know much about them, but they know what happened, what was done to them, and that's what I needed to know, what was done to them. And then on this little 3x5 card had the details a little bit and room for me to write.
And did that stay on the where they were in the beds?
It came to us.
Okay.
It went with us. And
how many people were aboard? How many people could you fit on the plane?
Well, I saw one. We did ground duties when we weren't flying, because we could only fly so many hours. But the ground duties we could do. And I had a notice of what was coming. It was 87 patients on litters, and it didn't register until they opened up the door of the plane, the back door, and it was arms 4 high, all the way from the tail to the cockpit, and all these arms out. And I was like, you know, I mean, it was a shock. I knew how many it was, but I had no idea what it would look like. And so the 2 nurses that had brought that plane in went to give report to the 2 nurses who were going to take it out. And my job was to clean up everything and take care of what was needed right at this moment. And it was a real job.
No doctors on board.
Never.
So you had to handle whatever was happening.
Yes. One time I had the burns got to be 1 nurse and 1 patient. And that's usually, I would fly out with a burn.
You would only take 1 burn?
We'd only take 1 burn, 1 nurse, and the plane, we would be it. This one time, I don't know how they got on the plane, but it was a doctor and a nurse from Brooke Army Hospital, which is a burn center. And the poor guy, he had a tracheotomy. That was one of the things all the corpsmen, the Navy corpsmen, all knew how to do a tracheotomy. And they saved a lot of people, more than most wars, because of that. Some that probably should have been allowed to die, but they didn't make that judgment. Anyway, this doctor and nurse from Brooke Army Hospital were on the plane when I got on it. And like I said, when you get up to altitude, things dry out. And if you have a tracheotomy, it's worse. And so what the flight nurses do, is drip saline in. And so I'm there talking to this kid that's burned all over and dripping this into his tracheotomy. This nurse and doctor are sitting on the chair doing nothing. About an hour out, I'm still dripping this. And the nurse comes over to me and says, "You're spoiling him." I wanted to punch her. I was like, "What?" She said, "He won't get that treatment when we get to Brooks." And I said, well, then he's getting it now. I was so angry. I just go back and sit in your seat, It was awful.
How would was there talking on the plane? Was there?
Oh, well,
what was the mood on the plane, and how did you? There's not very many of you guys jumping between patients, right?
Well,
how's that?
She had the one corpsman and one nurse had half the plane, and I had the other half. And the plane is very loud. There's no soundproofing. It's a cargo plane. It's just
and what it's a
C-141. I'll show you a picture.
Okay.
And there's one corpsman that has a window, and it's by the cockpit, and that's where he sits. The nurses sit in the back. And he came one time and said to me, we've been hit. Well, the noises are so, when I first started flying, I thought we were crashing all the time. But eventually you just, go with the flow. But this particular day, he comes and tells me that when we get up in the air that we've been hit. And I said, no, it's just another noise. And so when we landed, he couldn't wait to get me around there and show me the bullet holes. And I said, okay. At this point, you can't do it all. So you try to, and my corpsman was fantastic. I told him, these boys are going to get the best care they've ever had on this trip because they're not going to get it when they get home. And it was hard. It was hard to see outside. And when you said that one thing, that was my biggest problem. I would start off in the Philippines. I would go to Vietnam.
How long was that?
Well, it was night, so we would leave like 1 a.m. and get there at 6 a.m.
Saigon, or where did you land? Do you know?
Mostly in Tan Son Nhut, occasionally Cameron Bay. And I think I went once into, I can't think of the name of it. It starts with an N.
Well, hold it. You left at what time?
We leave at 1 a.m.
And you'd get there
at about 6.
Okay.
Would be daylight. And the reason that they like to fly at night is because it's hot and the airplane can't get off the ground as easily as they can in the night. That's what they told me, because I kept saying, I'd like to sleep now. Anyway, what was I saying?
So you're full of cargo.
Full of cargo. We let the cargo off. We're getting the patients on.
And they're on a bus. The patients are on a bus?
I don't know how they got to the airport, but everywhere else it was a bus.
Okay.
That was probably a bus. In fact, yeah, because I spent 2 weeks in Saigon training the Army nurses on some of the problems that we couldn't take up in the air, which eventually wasn't followed anymore.
The guys come on, did they come on litters, most of them?
Well, the ones that were bedridden were on litters. The ambulatory the ambulatory would usually go back to Vietnam once they were taken care of, whatever they had. In fact, we hardly ever even talked to them because we were busy with the others. But on one flight, one of my friends, the girl that I had been in with all the time, she had a full body cast, and she noticed some bleeding, and she put a mark around the bleeding, and a few minutes later it was outside the mark, and so she kept doing that, and then she realized, this is bad news, I can't get to that bleeding. And so what she did, which what you have to do, is tell the pilot he has to land the first place he can land in was Wake Island. And she told him, he's bleeding and I can't get to it. And so they transfused him he was all right except for this.
Right.
They transfused him immediately with the wrong match, and he had brain damage. And she had post-traumatic stress syndrome. She ended up being a colonel. She stayed in for 20 years. And she had post-traumatic stress disorder the whole rest of her career up until she died. And because of that one thing. So because of that, we wouldn't take a cast that wasn't what we call bivalved. You could put a ace wrap around it,
right,
and then you could
get underneath it.
Yeah. So that was learned, something that we didn't know before. We learned a lot of things. We didn't have a place to hang the IV, so we taped it on the things that were holding all the things up. But when you had to take it off, it was a real pain in the neck trying to.
Did some of the guys need oxygen?
Well, if they did, they didn't get it on our plane because we didn't have any oxygen. So that was one of the rules. They were not supposed to pick up. We weren't supposed to take them. Well, unfortunately, we had to take them. We had to clean out the MASH unit for the next group. And so that was a problem. By the time we could only fly like 8 hours or something. Can't remember how many hours, but anyway, at a time. When we got if we were going to Travis, that plane would stop in Guam and let off patients, and then we would go to Hawaii, and we would get off the plane. And,
that's where you got off.
Yeah, and another nurse would come on. Well, that was okay, but then when we got to the next nurse would take it to Travis, and this nurse only flew in the States. So they had no understanding of us taking a patient that didn't qualify, and they would refuse to take the patient. So we'd have this argument with the nurses there. And one time in Alaska, I just said to the nurse, "Do you want me to put him on the runway? What do you want me to do with him? We had to take him. You have to take him."
Was it that they didn't want to be responsible because they felt like he was too severe to be on that plane for what they could take care of?
If they were really bad, they would be sent to Hickam or to Japan. We'd get them off. But when you flew from Japan to Alaska, Alaska was the last place we were allowed to go. I had to deadhead back to the Philippines. And that was the one thing that my corpsman was fantastic at, getting us on planes that we could have the front seat, put our feet up, or if it was an Air Force plane, we could get on top of the one of the container things and sleep, But that was the worst part, was the deadheading back. And frequently he'd get us on a airplane that was going to Vietnam with passengers that were going to Vietnam. And this one flight that I was on with the stewardess came and said, "Are you a nurse?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, "Well, I would like for you to come and see this man." And it was a sergeant that they had on their winter uniforms because it was winter in the States. And he was having chest pain. And so I gave him some morphine and some aspirin and told the stewardess that we needed to get the oxygen down on him, and I needed to talk to the pilot. And so I told the pilot he's having a heart attack. He needs to be offloaded. And so we stopped at Wake, and he was offloaded, and I got a letter from him. It was the funniest letter ever. It was addressed to Sergeant Halterman. I was a captain, and it had not Halterman, but something close to Halterman. And I was in the Army, and it was just a funny letter. But it was, he
thanking you.
Yeah, thanking me. But it was not addressed to who I was. So,
So what's probably the most startling thing on one of those flights that you remember?
Well, having my leg grabbed by a drug addict that I had seen before, that I had taken home before, and was sent back to the, but my leg was in a grasp from the bottom litter, and I was like, I went down and looked, and it was him, and I was like, oh, he wants his medicines, how did he get back there? What kind of thinking?
How was that a year tour? How long were you on the plane?
Well, it was a year for me because I met my husband during all of this in Hawaii, and he was in the Navy, and we communicated back and forth. Of course, it was like 2 weeks between, and somewhere in like 6 months, he called me. He knew I was going to be, somehow I got a phone call from the Philippines to his phone, and it was one of those ship-to-shore things,
Mm-hmm.
and I had it was terrible. I can never do those things, and it was in the middle of the morning, and the man that was doing this said, Captain Halterman wants to speak to Lieutenant Merchant, and it was his roommate answered it, and a captain in the Navy is a colonel, and so he went to get my future husband, and he said, "Isn't she a little old for you?" But that we talked on that one, and we always tried to meet when I went to Travis. Well, unfortunately, that never worked out. His boat was either doing something or, whatever, but that never worked out. And I think out of desperation, he asked me to marry him when we finally had a phone call thing. And so we got married at Travis because I knew all the nurses there. They set everything up. And then we had a 2-week honeymoon. And then I went back to flying, and he went back to his destroyer. And it was another 6 months. And they didn't really want to let me out, but I had done my year, and that was what was required. You had to do a year at your next assignment. And I tried my best to get transferred to March Air Force Base because my job was if I was a nurse in the Air Force, that would be my job I would want. But the Air Force wouldn't allow it.
Mm.
And so I got out after a year.
You traveled with the same corpsman, same nurse too, generally?
A different nurse.
They're different nurse.
Mm-hmm.
And did you see the same pilots all the time, or no? Was that always different?
I never even saw the pilots.
So it was totally isolated where you guys were.
One time, this was the worst thing I ever saw. Like I said, we're shopping in Alaska or the Philippines or in Japan or Hawaii, and then we'd go to the battlefield and pick up patients, and it was very, it really did affect me. I didn't know how to deal with it. But the worst part was taking them back to the States and knowing that I couldn't even wear my uniform off base. And that these boys were going to, I go to the VA for my care. I'm 10 years older than the
regular Vietnam vet.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I look 30 years younger. They look so old and so decrepit, and their wives look just the same way because they were not treated well, and then they didn't take advantage of the GI Bill because they had post-traumatic stress disorder, which was not diagnosed in those days. It was, it was hard.
How did you unload that? They had their own level of trauma, but you had your level of trauma of seeing that en masse.
When I got out, my husband was home there. He was there. And we were in San Diego, and we were in a Navy community, and I didn't have that feeling that I had at Travis.
What feeling? What do you mean?
The feeling of not being anybody, because the war didn't mean anything to anybody. And I never talked about it because now I'm a Navy officer's wife, and it's very formal. It's not like the Air Force at all. It's very formal. And he's on a destroyer. He's the communication officer on a destroyer, and his boss, his captain, was a great guy. He and his wife were super people. But I had a new life, a whole new life I had. And so I never talked about my military thing until, my husband and I were married 43 years. And
Did you even talk to him about it or no?
No.
Wow.
Well, I probably did to him at the beginning.
Yeah.
But I just sort of blocked it out until he left me. We just finished serving 2 full-time missions, and he ran off with his high school girlfriend.
That's crazy.
I was like, he left me with a note, and we joined the church together. I was so
You're
shocked.
Blindsided by this.
Yeah, and afterwards, after the divorce, and I looked back on it, I could see what happened. It was just as much my fault as his, I guess, because I was busy doing genealogy. But I had post-traumatic stress disorder from that, and I didn't understand it. And the psychiatrist said, well, when you count that your first baby died in the delivery room and your fourth baby both of their illnesses were associated to Agent Orange, and and you go down the list of things that happened to you, that was the straw that broke the camel's back. And so they were giving me different drugs. None of it worked. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. So I started running.
At what age?
72. I ran a half marathon at 72 with my niece. She got me running. And my kids all said, yeah, run with her, run on this thing. And I thought 13 miles is a long distance. So I ran it twice in my park. 4 hours it took me to run it. And I thought, well, this thing is supposed to be downhill from the university downhill. Well, it's uphill first, and then it's downhill, and then it's uphill. And so I walked most of it, except for the downhill parts. And in one place, there was a lot of people on both sides of the road, and they had bells and everything, and I was walking. I was the only person on the road. I came in with the marathoners, and my niece says, well, look at this. You came in first. I said, what? That can't be right. She said, in your age group, you're the only one in your age group. I said, I don't care. That's good. I felt fantastic.
That's amazing.
Did it. Yeah.
Way to go. That's amazing, honestly.
And so I started running. I thought I can do 2 miles or 3 miles. And I started doing 3-mile, the 5K races and winning.
I've never heard anyone your age starting to run at that age.
Well,
ever.
I
don't know of any. Oh, yeah.
I had run until I was 50, but it hurt my calves.
Yeah,
so I quit. But now I had this band around my knee, and I just kept running. And that's how I met Richard. Online, I put that I ran, but after he left, it was like 4 years of a problem. And Taylorsville used to have a veterans parade. And I thought, I think I'll go walk in this parade and take my grandchildren so they know there's that war, which got completely ignored, was something. And so I pushed one in a stroller and made the other ones walk with me, and did that the first year. And then I went to Texas Roadhouse for a lunch, veterans lunch.
Yeah.
And I thought, man, this is pretty fun. And then eventually I did that every year that Taylorsville had the parade. Then they stopped having it. But I went to a veteran women's thing downtown in the Zion's Bank at the top floor of dinner. And there was a nurse there from the Second World War. I was like, oh my gosh. And she was in her uniform.
Wow.
I don't even know where my uniform went. We moved so much in the Navy, and I don't have any pictures except my formal pictures because they got wet somewhere and fell apart. But of my whole career.
Do you feel like during that whole time, you just kind of put all that away? Mm-hmm. Everything you experienced, saw, you just kind of put it away in the back of your mind?
I don't know. I think it was there. But when you're married to a naval officer, and as it happened, he was on a ship that didn't get away from the port, and he was the executive officer on it, and he and the captain got booted off their ship, and it was a disgrace, and it was hard. And I helped him through that,
Yeah.
But I didn't want to talk about my career because I do, and with Richard too, it's hard for him. He knows I have it, and now because here we have a veterans club.
Yeah.
It's, he was in for 6 months, less 1 day. That's how they did it. He went into the reserves after that, but it's not something that a wife normally.
It's, from what I can gather, and maybe you can explain, but I can tell you really, you enjoyed being of service on that plane.
Oh, yes. I wanted them to get the best care. I had a really hard time with some of the nurses that I've had to fly with. One outranked me, and if a patient came in leather restraints, that's where they stayed. I mean, that's an Air Force rule that's probably anybody with half a brain would know. You don't undo those restraints. And I'm working like crazy on my side, and I just happened, there's a little area open to go back and forth. And I see her. Not only has she taken him out of his restraints, but she's lit a cigarette for him to smoke. And I'm like, how do I tell a person who outranks me that she needs to get that patient back in the restraints? Because we don't have time to figure out what their personality's like. We just pick them up and drop them off. We have them for 8 hours, maybe is the most. And I was like, I go to Sergeant Harris. And I said, Sergeant Harris, I'm going to go get the major and ask her to join me for a conversation while you get that guy back in his restraints. And he went, he's out of his restraint. So he goes and I go. And I said to her, can I speak to you for a minute? And we go off, and I tell her that you can't take a patient out of restraints. You don't have time to diagnose him. We have a lot of patients that we need to take care of, and the plane needs to get safely to the other end. And what's wrong with it?
Wow.
And I'm like, oh my gosh, did she ever even go to flight school? Did she know it? Well, this same nurse, we carried a B4 bag.
What's that?
It's a soft outside suitcase. Okay. And you can stuff it full. And I spent 12 whole days in the Philippines in a year. The rest of the time I was somewhere else. So you would fly out from the Philippines, and then you would go to like Japan, and then a couple of days later you'd go to Alaska, and then you'd deadhead back. Then the next time you would go to Guam and Hawaii, and you'd stay in Hawaii for 4 days, and then you'd go to Travis. And so your suitcase your clothes get kind of yucky. So once once a month, you get to go home and wash your clothes and repack your B4 bag. And that this nurse, we were allowed to take one B4 bag and our medicine kit, and we took care of our medicine kit. When we got to customs in the States or in Japan or wherever, the corpsman would take our suitcase through and his suitcase through and make arrangements for us to get back to, which was a real blessing. I mean, because it's a horrible job. Well, and then we didn't have to go through customs. This nurse, this woman that took him out of his restraints, would have 3 hat boxes and a suitcase and, and so we were in Alaska and I saw her luggage going to a different airplane than our airplane. And I said to Sergeant Harris, "That's the major's luggage." And he said, "Don't say a word, just keep your mouth closed." Because they got tired of carrying her stuff. And the corpsman that was working for her put it with a tag, "Take to Germany and return in 2 weeks." So that's where her luggage went. But, that was the only humorous thing that we did on the whole thing. Well, except for a flight that we were deadheading, and that guy, but another one, we were in Hawaii, and we were deadheading back to the Philippines. And we got up in the air. We were circling around Hawaii, and I looked out the window, and the propeller, well, the turbine thing or whatever it's called, was on fire. And I said to the corpsman, "Do you think that's right, normal?" He said, "Whoa, no," And then the pilot comes on and says, "We're landing in Hawaii again. We have a little engine problem." So they put us in a room. And most of the people on this plane are going to Vietnam, and they're in their winter uniforms. So we sit in the terminal for a couple of hours while they work on this, and then we are called to go back on this plane. And so we get on the plane again, and we get up and we're circling around, and that same jet is on fire again. And we land, and we go back into the thing, and another couple of hours go by, and they call us out there again. And we're marching to the airplane, and this sailor in one of those blue sailor outfits just passes right out in front of me. I mean, he's hot, and he's probably terrified because I was terrified. And so the airline stewardesses come and they want us to get on the plane. And I said, "No, we're not going on this plane. We've waited how many hours here, and you're going to get us another plane tomorrow. You're going to put us in a hotel." Because this is so funny. I would have never done that if I hadn't had it done to me once. When I joined the Air Force, I had to go to basic training, and I'm in the airport. Eastern Airlines used to be horrible. You could never make your connection. So I'm a civilian, and I'm supposed to be at Maxwell Air Force Base, and my plane's already taken off. And so I'm up the desk, telling this lady, and the guy behind me steps up and says, "You get this lady a hotel room, and you make sure there's a taxi out there to take her. You provide all of this and get her to Maxwell Air Force Base on time." He was a colonel in civilian clothes. And I was like, "Okay." And the woman said, "Okay." And that's the only reason I would have ever done something like this. But I said, "We're not getting on this plane. We're going back in, and you're going to get us a hotel for the night." And she did. And the next day we flew without any trouble.
When you finished the flight, the 8 hours, because that must have been a busy 8 hours, were you just exhausted? Were you amped up? What was the feeling at the end?
Well, then you go in and give report, and I don't remember being exhausted. Most of the nurses partied. I didn't. I was, first of all, if you could see that there was a white spot under the ring, why would you even want to, And it got to that point where I just didn't want to. And then when I got married, I certainly didn't want to.
Yeah.
So I took a course, and I'd stay in my room and do my course. And but a lot of my friends made mistakes, because it's like, it's what's to live for? I think a lot of people look at it differently than I did. I looked at it as, I've got to do this job and I've got to get the best care and get them to where they're going and live through it. I had a lot of experiences because I got to stay in Guam for 2 weeks to teach the Navy nurses the same thing. Of course, it never panned out. We had to take them no matter what. And so it was kind of a waste, but it was interesting because in Vietnam, I was there in Saigon for 2 weeks, and I didn't know anything about Vietnam, and I didn't know it had been French at one time. And so that was interesting. And the USS Hope, I think that was the name of it. It's a hospital ship of the Navy. They invited me to lunch, and you had to salute. Yeah, very formal. The Air Force was not formal.
Did you go on that ship then?
Yeah, I went for lunch, but I had to salute the flag.
And that was in Vietnam?
In Vietnam. And it was very formal. The Navy, my husband had to pay a mess bill every year. And they got a napkin ring, and they, this white tablecloth. And that's how this was. It was a very nice lunch, and a few nurses on there, and they had some patients on there, so they showed me around the ship. It was interesting, but I was glad I wasn't in the Navy. And then when I was at Guam for 2 weeks, it was the Navy again, and then I realized the Navy nurses don't nurse. The corpsmen nurse. The Navy nurses direct, and that's not what I wanted. I wanted patient contact and
food on the plane. How did they feed you guys?
Well, box lunch, but
was it any good?
Yeah, it was.
Was it like a sandwich?
A sandwich and a piece of fruit, and but I think most of the time, maybe we didn't fly 8 hours. Maybe it was shorter than that. I don't know. I can't really remember, but I don't really remember eating on it.
Yeah. Oh, well,
I think we might have eaten before.
Yeah.
I think we ate before we.
Yeah.
Yeah, we had a box lunch, though. That would be, I think. I can't remember.
So looking back, you love nursing because you end up making a career of it after you got home.
Yeah. I only quit nursing because they wouldn't give me any help. And
you mean in the Air Force?
In the Air Force, because I wanted to live with my husband.
Yeah. But you mean later when you were up in Logan at that hospital?
I would have kept nursing if I could have had, if somebody would have listened. I was the only CEN they had, and so they decided they would make people get the CEN and get a raise. So I went downstairs for the raise, and they said, "You didn't get it here." I said, "It's a national exam. We get the same test all over the United States. How about that?" "Well, you didn't get it here."
Well, it sounds like you really found your calling being a nurse. What did you love about it the most?
Helping people, I guess. I don't know. And knowing what I needed to do. I could see a patient come into the ER. I knew exactly what I needed to do for that patient. They walked a certain way, they had a kidney stone. If they walked in holding their chest, they had a heart attack. I mean, it was, some of them were challenging, but most of the time, like a guy came in one night, he was a scout leader, and I knew him. He was Swiss or something, and because my son was in the Scouts, and I knew this guy, but I didn't know him real well or anything. And he said, "My heart's racing." And so I take him into the heart room and hook him all up and get an IV in him. I had to put it in his thumb. That was the only vein left. And he's telling me all this. He said, I was in Salt Lake, and I've had this before. And so I drove home to Cache Valley. He drove from Salt Lake with this heart
palpitating.
And I remembered I needed some milk, so I stopped at 7-Eleven and got some milk and took it home. And then I thought I'd better come in here. And then after I get this IV in, he says, you're the first nurse that ever got an IV in me. They usually have to call. And I said, well, if you wait 3 or 4 hours, I was so upset with him. I said, you knew you had ventricular tachycardia. Why did you wait? What took you so long to get in here? So I gave him a strip from the EKG, and I said, you keep this in your pocket, and you give it to when you start this, you give it to the front desk nurse and don't ever do this again to somebody. So he never came in again.
Looking back at your time in Vietnam, what's your takeaway from that?
It was a waste. War is a waste. It doesn't do anything for anybody. It kills, and the Agent Orange was a disaster. A lot of the veterans up there have Agent Orange problems.
Yeah.
And my 2 babies were on the list. My 4th, I had John, Elizabeth, Kathleen, and Heavenly. So Heavenly was born in the delivery room and died. She had spina bifida and hydrocephalic, but I never even saw her. They took her away, and that was it. Catherine was my 4th, and she had transposition of the aorta and pulmonary artery. And I thought, well, why don't they just switch them? But that's not the kind of surgery they do. Now that's what they do. But really? And she had, at 12 hours, she had a cardiac cath. And when they pull a balloon through to the opening and trying to keep it open so her blood would mix and she would have oxygen. She was rather blue. And it didn't work. And so before her surgery, the physician injured his back. So we were sent from San Diego to Norfolk, where they were supposed to be able to do it. And they couldn't do it either. And so we had to wait for University of Alabama to do it. And University of Alabama was so backward. The nurse asked me if she could, this is a 5-month-old baby. Can she have Coke and tea, iced tea? And I said, no, why would you give a cardiac patient Coke and iced tea? Well, she didn't answer. So her tray came up, and I was allowed to be there when the tray came up. And it had Coke and iced tea on it and food. Well, I nursed my babies, and they don't eat until they're 6 months old. And so when they made me stop nursing her, she's got a heart problem. You can't nurse her.
That's crazy.
I said, look at her. Does she look healthy? She looks healthy, except she's blue. I said, she has been fined. They wouldn't let me be with her. They had 12 babies and 2 nurses, and you could only be there for the visiting hours. I was so angry. But you don't want to be angry with the hospital that's taking care of your baby. So she ended up having 3 surgeries in 24 hours. And she didn't make it through the last one.
I'm sorry. That's terrible.
It was hard because she was such a happy little baby.
Oh, my gosh. I can't imagine.
Yeah. But between her and then Heavenly, and then my last baby has Down syndrome, and she is such a sweetheart. I didn't know anything about Down syndrome, and my doctor was a osteopath. the Navy got osteopaths in, and he was great. He said, I don't know anything about Down syndrome either, so we will get books and and he was so good. We just worked on it, and then there was a Coast Guard neighbor across the street who had been in Seattle, Washington, I think is where it was, and she was going to a play group for her little toddler, and there was a lady that had a Down syndrome baby and a toddler as well. So the toddler was with them, and they put the baby on the floor, and she started doing what they were doing, and so that started infant stimulation, but hadn't really gotten going yet.
Yeah.
But she lived across the street from me, so she came over when she found out that I had this baby with Down syndrome and didn't know what to do with her. And in the meantime, the doctor got a long slip. On one side was what the normal baby did, and on the other side was the age the Down syndrome baby was supposed to do it. Well, I was on the wrong side a couple of times. The poor baby did what she was supposed to do. My kids would toss her on a blanket up and down and to strengthen them because they're just limber.
Yeah.
And she always knew. I mean, she would laugh when she did something that she would just clap her hands and laugh when she did something that we wanted her to do, you know. And,
they're sweet kids.
Oh, gosh,
They really are.
She's 40. She'll be 46 this year. She lives with my oldest daughter.
Yeah, they are sweet people.
Well, she lived with me until she was 43, and then I couldn't do all the paperwork.
Yeah.
The paperwork is enough to make you lose your mind. But after 43 years of that paperwork that you have to do every year, and I said, either she goes and lives with somebody or she goes into one of the houses that I didn't want her to go to. But my daughter, they get along fine.
That's great.
And they have their father living with them. So it's, you have to learn to forgive and move on.
Yeah.
And I think I learned that in the Air Force, too.
You've lived a very interesting life.
I've had a fantastic life.
Thanks for sharing those stories. That's amazing to hear that. I've wanted to talk to a nurse that dealt with Vietnam, and what an honor to listen to your stories. And really, what a heroic thing you did. I mean, I know you're just doing what you were doing, but still, that was a lot.
Yeah,
that's a lot. That's a lot to do.
It taught me a lot. I don't see I don't want to be unhappy. I don't want to be sad. I don't want. I have had my episodes of sadness, and I'm thankful for them. I'm thankful for what I've learned.
Yeah.